Coast, Illinois, after which she spent most of her childhood in New York City. Having completed high school, she entered Yale University in the very first and highly selective first class that ever had women go to Yale. She's a graduate of Yale and has been an author and a journalist throughout her career. She was a member of the New York Times team that won the 1998 Pulitzer Prize for reporting on international affairs. She is also a recipient of the Marie Morse Cabot Prize for Distinguished Coverage of Latin America and a winner of the Robert F. Kennedy Sr. Award for Humanitarian Journalism. She is a writer for the Marshall Project, and she is with us today to discuss the realities of immigration from South and Central America and the difficulties enmeshed in our system of asylum. Please greet Julia Preston.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this extraordinary campus and this wonderful church. And what a way to spend a Sunday morning. It's so uplifting and special. So thank you very much. I am going to speak to you today about the choices that we face in the election. I know that it's not always an easy subject to talk about, but having been writing about immigration now for the better part of 20 years, I feel pretty strongly about what is before us in this election, so I'm going to let it rip today. So it's no secret that former President Trump has made immigration a leading issue in the campaign, and he has come forward with the claim that President Biden and Vice President Harris have thrown open the border and let millions of immigrants into the country. He has blamed immigrants for inflation, for black unemployment, for the housing crisis, and for a wave of crime he sees spreading across the country. And I think what we have here is a race between two very fundamentally opposed ideas about the value of immigration to the United States, the role of immigration in American prosperity and innovation. But this is not essentially a contest between two opposing policy proposals. On the one hand, you have Vice President Harris, who is herself the daughter of immigrants. Her mother's from India, her father is from Jamaica, and she has lived in her bones the experience of an immigrant family coming to America and thriving in this country. You may notice on the campaign trail that she doesn't emphasize her immigrant identity any more than she talks about her black identity, her South Asian identity, the fact that she's a woman. She is embodying this immigrant history. But her proposal, especially the proposal for what she calls an opportunity economy, this idea of opportunity is an essential element of the positive vision of America that immigrants bring, and that has been so important. The reason why so many people have come to this country is the idea of opportunity, the freedom to be what you can be, and especially that your children can be what they could be. And on the other hand, former President Trump, I believe, is offering something entirely different, which is not a set of policy proposals. For Trump, the immigration issue is a catalyst for him to energize and build his movement, the MAGA movement. He has very purposely created this nightmare vision of an alien invasion coming into this country, and he wields this as a rallying cry to unify his followers at the convention, in the debate, in his rallies. You hear it over and over again this very dark vision that he is portraying of what immigrants have done and would do to this country. And he centers his campaign increasingly, if you listen to his rallies and his proposals, the central proposition is what he calls the largest deportation operation in the history of the United States. Increasingly, this is the one proposal that he's bringing forward. So I want to talk today about the political practice of Trump and its significance and what this deportation proposal would mean, particularly here in this community in Philadelphia. So this is a practice that has been common in American history. He is a practitioner of xenophobia. He is practicing the fear and hatred of immigrants and immigration. And I think we haven't seen this in our presidential politics for many years. And so it's kind of unfamiliar to us, but this is what this is. This has been part of American history for a long time. So I'm just going to take you to the Republican National Convention. I don't know how many of you had an opportunity to watch the RNC, but so there was some thought that Trump might bring a message of unity to the convention after the assassination attempt. He talked about, and I thought I might show him saying this today, but I thought in a certain way that if you heard his words from me, that it might even have more of an impact. He talked about the fact that the country was facing a massive invasion of our southern border that has spread misery, crime, poverty, disease, and destruction to communities throughout our land. That's exactly what he said. He said that 21 million people, illegal immigrants, had stormed over the border and rampaged into the interior. And he cites this number, 21 million, over and over again. He is the only one who sees this number. The way he presents it is, other people have said it's less, but I know that this is 21 million people. And he portrayed to the convention this very ominous, pervasive, and deadly threat to the American community. And in his rallies, he's more explicit about that. He says, they are coming to kill you. He says this over and over again. He said at the convention, and he says very often, that unnamed countries have been opening their prisons and their insane asylums, as he calls them, and unloading their most dangerous criminals and psychopaths into the United States. And he, at the convention and often in his rallies, he dwells on these really terrible cases where Americans have been killed or attacked by immigrants. And he then magnifies that to portray this kind of widespread threat of really homicide and sexual violence. It's a very intense vision. And he did this at the convention, and he does it very often in his rallies. He talks about Hannibal Lecter. He says, the Democrats don't want me to say this, but they are coming to eat you for dinner. And I think it's become kind of, we're unfamiliar with this political practice, and so we don't react in a way that I think is appropriate to this really nasty slur that he is bringing forward to talk about immigrants in this country. And then at the convention, he did what he has done also in his rallies, which at the convention, people had placards that were pre-printed, that they held up, and he did a call and response. Mass deportations now. Mass deportations now. And he called out and he responded. So that was the one immigration policy that people were explicitly prepared to respond to at the Republican National Convention. So fact checkers had a field day with this speech from the convention. There were something like 3 dozen example of how unprepared we are today to understand what's going on here, which is the presumption of fact-checking. I'm in favor of fact-checking. I'm an accurate journalist. I try to be an accurate journalist, but the assumption behind fact-checking is that the person who made the inaccuracy will respond and correct, and that the public will be alerted to the fact that these statements were untrue, and they will be skeptical. But that's not what former President Trump is doing. He is purposely creating an alternate universe. He's not concerned about facts. He is creating a different image for people to follow him that only he sees and that only he can respond to. So we are not in the realm of fact-checking and truthful discourse on this side of the political spectrum. For example, the figure of 21 million people having poured into the country, this is wholly made up. This is not an exaggeration or some out of context. This figure does not exist. I'm not saying that there wasn't a big upswell of immigration across the border in the last 4 years. That happened. But the idea that this is 21 million people is just incorrect. It's wrong. There is no evidence that any country has opened its prisons or its insane asylums to let people come into the United States. This is just not true. This is a fabrication. This is an image. And obviously the murders that Trump talks about these are terrible crimes. Nobody thinks this is a good idea. There is a factual reality out there, which is we are not in the middle of a crime wave in the United States. The FBI just released its last report of major crimes, and homicide, sexual violence, the most serious crimes are down 10% this year just over last year. And in general, the crime situation in the United States as a whole is much improved since it was over the last 10 years. And specifically, there's been just a realm, just a mountain of research about the relationship between crime and immigrant communities. And for reasons that probably everybody can understand, in general, if you have a first-generation immigrant community, crime is much lower there. People didn't come to the United States in general to commit crimes. They came to work and to do something for their families. And very often what crime does exist in those communities, those criminals are preying on the exact communities that we're talking about here. And so, but former President Trump does have one very powerful argument in the middle of that, which he makes the point that if those individuals were not in the country, that crime wouldn't have happened. And that is an argument that resonates with a lot of people, I think. So then we come to the debate between Vice President Harris and Donald Trump on September 10th. And again, I'll give you his words. He said, "You see what's happening in towns throughout the United States. They are taking over the towns. They are taking over buildings. They are going in violently." He talked about an army. This is now an armed force of immigrants who are taking over the towns. He was referring to a specific event that took place in Aurora, Colorado, where there was a kind of an altercation at an apartment complex that involved a Venezuelan gang. And there was some kind of a battle there. But the sheriff and the police chief and the mayor of Aurora, Colorado came out and said, no, that's not what's happening. They're not taking over the town. They're not taking over the building. It's not what's happening. But of course, the more significant statement that Donald Trump made at the debate was what I'm sure you all heard about, which is that he said that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were, as he put it, they are eating the pets of the people that live here. And fortunately, I think one of the positive things that you could say about what's going on in our country right now is that immediately became like an ironic meme on social media where there were immigrants, Mexican immigrants, and people all over the country from the immigration community who were like making TikTok videos of their cat in a pot with cilantro and onions on their heads to, you know, to just kind of make fun of this. But for the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, this was not funny. This is an invitation to violence, actually. And the person who was, I thought, most effective in discussing this and appealing for reason was the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, who is a Republican, and who made it clear that he continues to support former President Trump and J.D. Vance in the presidential race. But he appealed to them to stop this because he had to send in the Ohio Highway Patrol. 2 schools were closed. The hospital was locked down. The city hall had to close. This was all because of bomb threats. There was a neo-Nazi parade through the Haitian community in Springfield. DeWine described this town where he actually grew up near Springfield, Ohio, that had become an epicenter of vitriol, as he put it. And one of the mistruths about what Donald Trump said at the debate was that the Haitians are, in fact, not unlawfully present. They all had some form of temporary protected status or some form of legal work authorization. So and most of them were gainfully employed in various factories and new jobs that had opened up in Springfield, which didn't have a labor force before the Haitians arrived. So this is not to say that everything was going smoothly in Springfield with the arrival of this new kind of immigrant population, but you know, this particular slur was just, you know, this is really on the level of, I thought, this is on the level of Emmett Till. This is that black man, that black boy touched my wife. This is where that kind of discourse is going. And Trump has not backed down from that at all. He continues in his rally to say that the Haitians are, as he puts it, ruining our country. And he invites his followers to this call and response. Send them back, send them back, send them back. So this is the mood that he is creating about this in his rallies and in these very public forums. And so then he describes why it is that he wants to send them back, why you need a massive deportation operation as a response to this situation of immigration. And he says, these are the people that that Harris and Biden led into a country. They're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. They destroyed the fabric of our country. And in some of his rallies, he's even more explicit about this, where he says that the immigrants are, as he puts it, poisoning the blood of our country. So, let's call this what this is. This is white nationalism. This is nativism. This is a very crude form of nativism that we don't recognize. I believe that people of good faith are hesitant to recognize what this is because it's on the national stage. We have a man who's running to be president again, using this kind of discourse. This is really hate-filled discourse. And so I want to point out so his proposal is now the largest deportation operation in American history. He says this over and over again. This is his primary proposal. And I'll just point out to you that deportation is not a border security policy. He's not even talking about how he's going to solve the problem at the border. So when I say that we're not having a debate in our election between, two policy proposals about how to solve the problem at the border, that's what I mean. This is not a border enforcement policy. He's talking about expanding immigration enforcement in this unprecedented way into the interior of the country and into communities that are far away from the borderlands. He's essentially talking about a purge. And why do I say that? Because, for one reason, the way he talks about how he's going to do this. So he talks about, Trump has said, and it's part of the platform of the Republican Party now, that he's going to invoke a 1798 statute called the Alien Enemies Act, which will allow him to mobilize local law enforcement, in addition to the immigration and customs enforcement agents and Customs and Border Protection, local law enforcement, the National Guard, and also active duty military can be mobilized to, as this statute says, to repel the enemy incursion. And he's talked about creating massive detention camps that would be staging grounds for this deportation at the border, and is not reluctant to have this proposal be compared to the internment of Japanese citizens that happened during World War II. He has not, however, described how it is that he's going to find 21 million people. So part of the purpose of this largely inflated and manufactured number is that then that justifies this very broad sweep that he, is proposing. He says the first thing we're going to do is get rid of the terrorists and the criminals. And I would just point out that we do have we have a broken immigration system, but we do have a functioning criminal justice system in this country. And people who have committed serious crimes are prosecuted in the criminal justice system. And, hopefully a very large portion of them are serving sentences in prison if they've committed the type of crime and are the criminals that he's describing here. So it's not clear if Trump is proposing to somehow reach into our prison system and find people who are foreign born and take them out. There's also another operational problem, which is you have a country like El Salvador. Many of these people presumably are from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico. What are they going to take these individuals back? Countries that are already struggling with high degrees of lawlessness and criminal violence. You can't just, a deportation is a mutual accord. You can't just deport somebody to any country on earth. This is the basis. There's a lot of international law and agreement that has to take place for a deportation to happen. So would these countries even be willing to take, hundreds of thousands of people back? That's a question. But really, what he's talking about is a drag. He's not talking about going to prisons and jails. He's talking about going into communities and finding there are more than 11 million people in this country who are undocumented, and essentially he's going after them, and he's not making a secret about that. This is the community that he really wants to go after, and so this is where you all come in, because these folks are in your community, and according to the recent analysis of census data, they're in the state of Pennsylvania. There are 153,000 individual immigrants who are undocumented people. And the majority of them live right in this area. And there are a few things about them. First of all, they are in violation of immigration law by their unlawful presence, but immigration law is civil code. They are not criminals. By and large, Very few of these folks have any kind of criminal record. Half of them have lived in the United States. I'm talking about the people who live right around here. You know them. You know these folks. They're your landscapers. They're the people who repair your roof. They are the babysitters for your children and their grandchildren. They are providing your home health care. They are here in this community. You may not know that you know them, but they are here and you know them. Half of them have lived in the United States for more than 10 years. 43,000 of the people who live in Pennsylvania, many of them in this community, have at least one minor child who is a U.S. citizen. And this is very important because these kids are not leaving. 33,000 of the undocumented people who live in Pennsylvania, many of them in this area, are married to a United States citizen or a legal resident. They live in mixed status families, and this is something that we need to start understanding. They're not over there and we're over here. They are part of our communities, and they live in families where you have United States citizens, you have legal permanent residents, and you have people who, for one reason or another, have not been able to fix their immigration status. 1 in 3 of the adult undocumented people in the state of Pennsylvania own a home. They are homeowners. And a very high percentage of them are employed. They're definitely in the workforce. So when you, essentially what we are talking about here is an operation that would be going house to house, very likely going house to house in some of these communities and raiding workplaces where these people are providing, valuable work and have been in this workforce for many years. And people, there's a criticism, economists have really pointed to the fact that not only is this this kind of mass deportation, because to be honest with you, we experienced something of a very high degree of deportation in some places under President Obama. It has started a long time ago, that there's been a pretty steady pace of removals happening in communities around the country. So people have been able to see the long-term impacts of some of what happens after removal. And when you take a large number of people out of the labor force, like if in an immigration raid or something like that, it's not beneficial to the American citizen workers, because the factory loses output, people get, there tends to be job loss all around when you have a situation of mass deportation. But the impact that I want to point out to you, and that is most meaningful to me, since I've written about the aftermath of deportation in immigrant families, is the impact on the children. And I really appeal to you to think about this. And I'm not going to read to you from my stories because I would get all emotional about it, so I'm just going to give you a cold, dispassionate policy statement from the American Psychological Association about the aftermath of deportation on immigrant families. So they said the following: children face serious challenges due to the deportation of a parent, including economic hardship, housing instability, food insecurity, and separation from parents. Children experience behavioral changes in eating and sleeping habits, and emotional changes such as increased crying, anxiety, anger, aggression, withdrawal, and a heightened sense of fear. In 3 cities after immigration raids, results showed that children were feeling abandoned, isolated, fearful, traumatized, and depressed. Children also experienced academic withdrawal and family dissolution after the deportation of a family member. Children who were present at the moment a parent was detained tended to have greater emotional, cognitive, and behavioral effects. Furthermore, after a deportation, older children often needed to take on jobs to help support the family, which impacts school performance, persistence, and retention. So to my mind, this is the harm. This is the hidden harm that is behind this idea of mass deportations. This is the one we should be concerned about. So how did we get here? Well, we got here because I'm sure everybody saw that President Biden had to deal with a huge post-COVID mass migration, unprecedented level of migration in the hemisphere. And he had to deal with the effects of a profoundly broken immigration system, and particularly in the case of the Southwest border, a broken asylum system. And at the same time, we had a situation where the governor of Texas, I think very shrewdly, decided to use a busing process to export the crisis that they were seeing at the border to Democratic-controlled cities around the country. So all of a sudden, you have Texas at very substantial expense to the taxpayers of Texas, busing people to New York, Boston, Chicago, Denver, and maybe some of them came here to Philadelphia. And so, you know, the cities in general that received these migrants were welcoming cities. They tried to be welcoming, but the numbers were significant, and Governor Abbott did not coordinate these buses, and so that, you know, the city officials were, all of a sudden there were, you know, busloads of people arriving at midnight in the central square. And this happened over and over again in New York, and people had to respond. And I do think that many Americans got the impression, because the system is so badly broken, they got the impression that these people, this particular generation of migrants had jumped the line and were kind of gaming the system, that there was something really essentially unfair about what was happening with these migrants. In fact, what happened is that we have an asylum system that has a very broad opening. The beginning of our asylum system at the border, it's pretty easy to get into the asylum system at the border, but it's very hard to actually win asylum, and the process has just taken years now. The immigration courts where these things have been decided are so clogged and backlogged. There's now more than 3.7 million cases in the backlog in the immigration court, so it takes an average of 7 years to get an asylum, you know, ruling. And meanwhile, the folks after 6 months, if you do things right, you are entitled to a work permit. So this, in practice, it became this very dysfunctional, very protracted, but you know, available system for mass labor migration, which the asylum system was never designed to do. So at the heart of what we have here is an asylum system that is really fundamentally broken. And that brings us to, so in the last 2 years, after President Biden, you know, grappled with this problem, people were spreading across the country, and we did see these images of chaos, and the border was overwhelmed. In the past few years, President Biden has taken steps to close down the asylum system at the border that actually has put him on the wrong side. I mean, this crackdown at the border by this Democratic president has been much more severe and effective than anything that former President Trump did the entire time he was in office for 4 years, and has put President Biden on the wrong side of the entire advocacy community. So this is very controversial within the Democratic Party, the severity of this really, it pretty much totally shut down the asylum system at the border, which there are many people in need of protection who are coming to the border who now are really not able to get it. So this is, we've now gone, because of this, we haven't fixed the asylum system, and so President Biden has just made this decision to really just, okay, for the time being, we're going to shut it down. He has opened a series of legal options, but they're all temporary. It's not a satisfactory system, but he's moved to take some pressure off the border by opening some legal pathways. Now you come to Vice President Harris, and essentially, for better or worse, what she is proposing is something to try and fix this problem. So you do have a policy proposal from Vice President Harris. The way she's expressed it is she says there was a bipartisan security bill that was negotiated in the Senate, and this was, Chris Murphy from Connecticut, Langford from Oklahoma, very conservative Republican, and Kirsten Sinema from Arizona. They negotiated this bipartisan security bill in the Senate. They introduced it in early this year in January, and Donald Trump shot it down. I'm not saying this. It was crystal clear what happened. Donald Trump went to Mike Johnson, and he went to the senators in the Republican caucus and said, "Do not go for this bill. We want to continue to be able to run our campaign on this issue." And so what this bill does is it contains the scaffold. It's the beginning of a way to fix the asylum system. And she doesn't talk about that much, but it is a concrete proposal that would fix the system by creating an asylum. They would take it out of the immigration courts. They want to create a corps of asylum officers who would make a faster decision at the border. You would get your decision within 6 months. It's be much harder to qualify. These are good things to do. I am of the view that you will never solve the problem at the border until you really take seriously opening new legal pathways for people to come for labor migration. We need the labor force. There are ways to fix this. Vice President Harris has also talked about giving legal status to these undocumented people, so there's a very sharp contrast there. Instead of purging them and taking them out of their families, she's talking about, okay, these are working people, they've been here for a long time, they have U.S. citizen spouses and children, let's get them legal status. So, where are we? What is the inflection point we're at right now? Well, so in 1924, I'm going to do this very quickly. 1924, 100 years ago, at a time where some of the economic issues were similar to what we're experiencing today, and there was very large influx of immigration. The United States adopted an immigration statute that was explicitly based on racial categories. So the purpose of that statute of 1924 was to prevent Italian people, Polish people, people from Southern and Eastern Europe from coming to the United States, and to privilege immigration from Northern Europe. And there was an explicit description at the time that the reason that we did this was because people from Southern and Eastern Europe were intellectually inferior. They had smaller brains. It wasn't a good idea to bring this population into the United States because this would degrade the quality of the American genetic endowment, essentially. This was the explicit argument at the time. And that statute existed, and also there was, that statute also enshrined the complete exclusion of Chinese people and most Asian people that was already in effect at that time. So that statute existed in one form or another until 1965. So in the period when we were going through that whole civil rights change and, a whole upgrade of our country and, thinking about civil rights, we also finally did away with that race-based immigration system. That was 1965. It really wasn't that long ago. And then in 1954, we had something called Operation Wetback. This is an operation that is explicitly named for a slur that we would not say in public, polite company today. Although this has been the basis, and former President Trump explicitly invokes Operation Wetback when he talks about the deportation program that he wants to do today. So this was another period where there was a large, the system was broken, huge movement of mainly farm workers from Mexico came into the United States unauthorized. And President Eisenhower authorized this movement, this deportation movement, and the immigration agents fanned out across the southern of the United States. 200,000 people were formally deported in 2 months. And they sent them back to Mexico in boxcars, herded, and another almost 800,000 people were so terrorized by this that they left. So you had, in a very short period of time, Operation Wetback removed almost 1 million Mexicans from the United States. And people still remember this in the Mexican-American community. This was so traumatizing and disruptive. There was something important about Operation Wetback, which was its purpose was to channel people into a legal program called the Bracero program. So there was a legal opportunity, at least, that was opened up at that time to try and get those farm workers out of an unauthorized status and put them into a recognized program, which, of course, we don't have that today. So even this very damaging, historically shameful episode doesn't have, it provided more opportunities for immigrants than what is being proposed today. So I can't tell you how you should respond to this, but I will tell you how I have responded to this as someone who I've been writing about immigration now for almost 20 years, and I wrote a bunch of stories about the aftermath of deportation. I saw this, what happened in families. One of the families that I wrote about, 2 of the 4 children, young girls, attempted to commit suicide when they were in high school. I mean, this is devastating, these deportations. The kids can't understand what happened to their parents. And they lose faith. How can you trust your community if someone is going to sweep in and take your parent away for some reason that you can't really understand? So I really felt that, I practiced nonpartisan journalism my whole life. I worked for the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and most recently for the Marshall Project. This is nonpartisan journalism, and I believe in that journalism. I believe that journalists have to approach a factual inquiry and not have any kind of assumption about what they're going to find. You have to be open to the story that's going to come to you as a journalist. But I did not feel in this situation that I could continue to practice nonpartisan journalism. I feel very strongly that we have one candidate who is proposing something very disruptive for our communities, and we have another candidate who is at least looking forward, trying to solve the problem, and we can have a debate about whether, what's the best way to maximize the incredible value that immigration has brought to our country, and figure out how to fix that system and incorporate more of these people into our community. So that, I can't tell you what to think, but that was my choice. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions.
There are all sorts of moral and ethical values to not discriminating against immigrants, but could you talk about the economic argument, the value of immigration to our economy?
So, just at the moment, we have a significant labor shortage in a lot of our industries. Farm work, certain kinds of construction work. We are talking about a housing shortage, and very significant portion of the immigrant community, and particularly the undocumented immigrant community, these folks are employed in housing construction. So removing them from the labor force doesn't make sense, even in terms terms of a proposal to confront the housing crisis, which is a supply issue. And this is, this has been, there's so many examples of this, that the immigrant community, and especially the undocumented immigrant community, they are providing a basic labor force for so many of our fundamental industries. And basically what economists find is that it's not competition, it's what they call, it's a complementarity. So when you have a strong presence of immigrant labor at the sort of basic level of a manufacturing labor force, then what that does is it allows the whole business to expand, and then you get more skilled and higher paid jobs at a higher level, which then are occupied by American workers. So that's part of the argument. That's certainly a substantial part of the argument. I mean, but on a larger scale, I mean, Social Security, our labor force, if we want the Social Security system to continue to overcome the crisis that it's facing, you have to have able-bodied, you have to renew your labor force on a macro scale. The countries that have not done this are the countries that really struggle over time. And among other things, I mean, I'll just mention, I can't remember what the figure is, but the reason that the Social Security system is actually viable today, is still solvent, is because of undocumented people who have been paying in for years and years to this system for benefits that they will never be able to recover. I mean, it's on the level, I can't remember, I don't want to cite an accurate figure, but it's billions of dollars every year that undocumented people are paying into the system because they are paid by a paycheck just like anyone else who has a job like that. They get their deductions, their Social Security deductions. And so the presence of undocumented people has been very significant in maintaining, staving off the imminent crisis that we have in our Social Security system. Yeah.
What changes do you think need to be made in the current immigration system?
So we need this. I agree with the proposal to, at the heart of this problem that we've seen most recently is an asylum system that is broken. And the asylum system, it's hard to understand. This is a stepchild of the refugee system. We also have a refugee system. The refugee system is very orderly. People come, they're vetted, there's a resettlement process. Asylum is for people who come to the border and step on American soil, and then they say they need protection. And so that's the system that has gotten all out of whack. It doesn't provide timely decisions on claims. It's overwhelmed the immigration courts, and it was never meant to be a labor system. So we need to fix asylum so that people who come and have legitimate claims get those claims decided quickly in the context of a border where we know where they are, and people who claim asylum and don't get it have to be deported. They need to be removed from the country. At the same time, the only way, we have the largest economy in the world, and our economy is thriving. There are labor needs all over our economy. As long as that is the case, people will find a way. People who want to work and want a better future for their families are going to find a way to come. And so we need to be thoughtful about creating a system for labor migration into this country that responds to the particular needs of our labor markets and where people go to the places where people need them. So instead of sending, I mean, think how different this would have been if the governor of Texas, instead of sending people to downtown Manhattan, had sent people to the meatpacking factories in Iowa, where people are crying, or the dairy farms, even, I guess, in Pennsylvania. I mean, even in this state, there's all kinds of needs for this kind of labor. If we had a system that was an orderly labor system where you what I do think is that Vice President Harris has understood is that, you know, for years and years and years and years, there have been these proposals to reform the immigration system that include something that I also think is important, which is legalization, bring, you know, a path to citizenship for the long-term undocumented people, for the kids that came when they were children, the so-called dreamers, for the farm workers. Create, you know, let's get them into the system. The Republicans have said, we can't do that until you secure the border. And I think where American politics is right now is that Vice President Harris has acknowledged that this is true. So her proposal is border enforcement first, then we'll talk about immigration reform. And I think that is a correct assessment of where the larger American society is right now on this issue. Yeah. Yes?
Do you know of any
Sorry.
studies
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
in terms of absorbing an enormous amount of people into the communities and the stress that it places on the resources of the community
Yeah.
to have them blend in, I mean, education, all the services that you offer, that you don't overwhelm
Right.
what you have to
Absolutely.
offer. And, I mean, I think that's what you had in Texas. So, that's
Well,
why
I mean, that's what you have in New York. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
you know, this is, there were even undocumented immigrants who were saying, well, wait a minute, you know, you're putting these folks up in hotels, and you know, I've been here for 20 years without status, and you didn't do that for me. And there were a lot of taxpayers in New York who I think quite, you know, totally legitimately, their perception was, well, how come we're spending all this money on these folks, when they gained the system, you know, they don't seem to be waiting in line. Now we're paying for it, and what about our schools? And, you know, and in a certain sense, that's what happened in Springfield as well, was the community was like, wait a minute, we have 17,000 Asians, and they're now in the school system. I mean, these tensions exist. I mean, a more orderly system would not be sending people on buses to downtown New York, right, with no coordination. If you had a system where it was articulated so that you could, you know, the governor of Ohio, in fact, some of the governors have proposed this, you know, let us tell you what we need. And then you would have, the federal government would provide a channel so that people could go there. I've been covering immigration for a long time. I think that the issue that you're talking about here, which is the services were overwhelmed, people became frustrated and resentful, and residents didn't think it was fair. You know, they weren't consulted about this. It's for the first time since I've been writing about this issue, I saw that Americans were turning against immigration because of this perception of what happened. I get that. But, you know, going house to house and tearing people out of their families is not the solution. We have to get back to a process where I do think there are a lot of people in the Republican Party who also understand that this is about a workforce, this is a labor issue, this is not, you know, I think that we could get to a reasonable discussion. If people were more confident that the border was under control, I think it would open the way for a broader discussion of, okay, now how do we fix the system? Does that make,
it helps.
Yeah.
I would think the government should have done some studies to see how they overwhelm the system.
Right.
Rather than having a governor who had to export people because he saw his whole state getting overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the case of Texas, that was a political gambit. Yeah. He could have done, the difference with what Governor Abbott did was that he refused to coordinate. He was just sending people on buses. They were arriving at midnight in the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City. And if there hadn't been a political receiving cities. But anyway, it worked. Definitely, he had the impact that he wanted to have, so. Yes, sure, question.
Hi, critics of the former president might doubt some of the sincerity of the former president, but very often credit Donald Trump with sort of a innate sense for where public sentiment is, right? And so my question is, after, do you believe that that's true? Is there an indication out of his campaign focus being where it is and sort of the policy implementations put forward and sort of the implementations of enforcement that are surprising to you? In other words, is it sort of a signal that there's a stronger popularism movement? Is that borne out in the facts? And does it surprise you based on where you might have thought that sentiment was like 10 years ago?
Well, I think that I having, over the course of my writing about immigration, I spent a lot of time in factory towns, manufacturing places in, East Tennessee, here in Pennsylvania, upstate New York, where people were experiencing the impacts of deindustrialization. I have no doubt that this was an absolutely devastating experience for working class communities all over this country, but particularly in Pennsylvania, Appalachia. I mean, I saw this with my own eyes, what was happening. And blaming the immigrant for the job that he lost, Donald Trump figured that out. It's a very powerful message. It's not necessarily true. But in a lot of places, for example, in East Tennessee, you had people arriving from Mexico to fill a certain level of factory, the hardest job in your furniture factory. The job where you were right next to a saw, people were losing their fingers, those most dangerous jobs. Suddenly there were Mexican immigrants who were willing to come and fill those jobs, while most of those jobs were ending up getting exported to Mexico. So were people in those communities, veteran workers, pissed off about that? They were. And Donald Trump understood that. I just think, and he built a whole movement around that. And he speaks a language that channels that loss of respect that people, I get it, how devastating the process of globalization and deindustrialization was in many communities in this country. The problem is that the way he links that to immigration is not factual. It's much more complex than that. And in this campaign, for whatever reason, he's much more extreme than he was in 2016 or even in 2020. This is a level of, this is really delusional, what he's describing here. They're eating pets. So to me, that's part of the problem. So I totally agree with you that he has created a whole movement based on a very smart perception about an experience that many working class people had in this country. But where he's going with it now, I think is, well, you heard me talk. It's dangerous to work with. So I think, was there something over here?
So first I'd like to make a comment. This is like way too political for a forum for church. I'd rather be talking about how our Christian charity can help people. Now, that being said, I'm a proponent of legal immigration. We have laws in this country, and you're right, we need to reform them so that they work better. I agree with you. But also, when people come in illegally, we don't know the status of their, well, maybe it's criminal record, but we don't know the status of their health. When you come in here legally, you have to prove that you have immunizations and you have no communicable diseases. Okay, so we don't know if people coming in have polio or tuberculosis. My husband taught 35 years in an inner city high school in Philadelphia, There were many kids that were undocumented. My husband got tuberculosis, as did 3 other teachers in that high school of 4,000 people. So that is a problem. That is a big problem that we don't know. We don't know. We don't know if they're immunized. We don't know if they have communicable diseases. Also, you didn't mention anything about fentanyl. The fentanyl has been pouring in, and there are drug deals that have come in. Okay, I think that's a problem. I have personal experience. When it's personal, it becomes very important to you. I have a son-in-law from Norway. He could stay with his green card. He's married to an American citizen. He did become an American citizen the legal way. He did the whole thing, okay? And I had flowers on church for Assistant Fire Marshal Sandra Cohen, who 2 months before COVID broke in December was mowed down when he stopped to help a young FBI agent who was in a car accident on 290 in Maryland, 4 lanes each way. They couldn't cross. He called it in, they put the flashers out, they put his car in the front. They couldn't cross over the 4 lanes to get over there. They stayed near the Jersey barrier in the middle. They were mowed down by a guy who came over, and my friend's son body went the other way. The FBI agent's on the floor with his arm hanging out. They both died. And lo and behold, he goes into the station, and the illegal immigrant, club comes and gets him out. He would never had toxicology. We don't know if he had drugs.
I'm sorry, we're running late.
Okay,
And,
but other people had a chance to talk. I would just like to finish this. He was
Do
an
you have a
illegal.
question? Do you have a question? Because we don't have a time for speeches.
He was an illegal alien who had been deported twice.
what's your question?
Thanks to Governor Hogan,
So what's your
we were
question?
able, why did it take almost 2 years to redeport him
So-
after being deported twice? You tell me. Why? Why? Why did it take 2 more years to deport someone who had been deported two times?
Julia doesn't know the answer to that question.
But I'm happy to engage this. I'm happy to engage this discussion because this is the discussion that we're having. Yeah. I mean, I can't answer the question about the specific, although I would say that that is a symptom of how broken the immigration system is. And we're talking about 2 different things here, which is, one is getting the border under control. I understand that that's your concern. I agree with that concern. I think most Americans agree with that concern. You have to take specific steps. You have to propose a project to make the border, to enforce the border, to stop people from coming across the border from North. I would just submit to you that today, there are fewer people, the number of unlawful crossings as a result of the rules that President Biden put into effect earlier this year are down 50%. It's lower than it was at the end of President Trump. President Trump never accomplished in the 4 years that he was in office the level of enforcement control that we have today at the border.
What about the health concerns? Have we?
Well, so that's what you're saying, is you want to have an orderly process so that people can come to the border and have a vetted process and have their health checked. I agree with that. I think that there is a general agreement. The question is, so, how do we get there? And a mass deportation of people who've been in the country for 10 years, they don't have the health issues that you're talking about. This is not a solution to this problem. And I will point out to you that you are in favor of legal immigration, but former President Trump is not in favor of legal immigration. He cut the refugee system. Today we have the refugee system, which is a very orderly system. People are vetted by the United Nations. They are vetted by the State Department. They go through years of vetting before they come in. They have a resettlement program. This church may be participating in a refugee resettlement program.
That's the way church.
President Trump cut that program to 11,000 people. The current number is 125,000 people. We need to create legal pathways. I agree with you. You're right. You are correct. We need to create legal pathways for people to come into this country. We need the labor. We are proud to give protection to refugees. I submit to you, we agree. We don't have a difference here. We agree. We need to create a functioning, orderly